They say that death usually comes quietly or with a bang. But in Boston, in 1919, death arrived as a sweet, sticky tsunami that moved faster than a racehorse. You might think I am telling you a tall tale, a flood of syrup. It sounds like a bedtime story for children or a scene from a cartoon. But let me tell you, friends, there was nothing funny about January 15th, 1919. It was one of the strangest and most terrifying disasters in American history. Today, we are going to talk about the day the streets of Boston turned brown, the air smelled like sugar, and the world learned that sweetness can be deadly. Hello, old guard. It is Pop Pop. Pull your chair a little closer today. We are leaving the bright lights of the 50s and 60s for a moment to step back into the gritty industrial world of 1919. The First World War had just ended. The soldiers were coming home. America was on the verge of prohibition. And in the north end of Boston, an immigrant neighborhood full of Italians and Irish families, life was hard but hopeful. It was an unusually warm day for January. The temperature had climbed to 40 degrees. People were opening their windows. Children were playing outside during their lunch break, but looming over their playground right next to the busy commercial street stood a monster. It was a giant steel tank, 50 feet tall and 90 feet wide. Inside that tank were 2.3 million gallons of molasses. Now, when you think of molasses, you think of cookies or pancakes. But this wasn't for baking. This was industrial molasses, fermented to make alcohol for munitions and dynamite during the war. That tank was a ticking time bomb, and nobody knew that the clock had run out. The locals knew the tank was trouble. They called it the Weeping Tank. It leaked so badly that the neighborhood children would run up to it with cups and sticks to scrape the sweet syrup off the rivets. It was a treat for them. But for the men who worked there, the groaning sounds coming from inside the steel belly were a warning. Here's a fact that makes my blood boil. The company knew the tank was leaking, but instead of fixing it, do you know what they did? They painted the tank brown. They painted it the color of molasses so that people wouldn't see the leaks. They hid the danger in plain sight. At approximately 12:40 p.m., the lunch hour was in full swing. Suddenly, a sound tore through the air. Witnesses said it didn't sound like an explosion. It sounded like machine gun fire, rat-a-tat-tat. That was the sound of thousands of steel rivets shooting out of the tank as the metal sheets ripped apart. The ground shook so hard people thought it was an earthquake, and then the wall of syrup fell. Friends, try to imagine this: a wave of molasses 25 feet high, that is taller than a two-story house, crashing into the street. And it wasn't moving slowly like cold syrup from a jar. Because of the sheer weight and pressure, it moved at 35 miles per hour. You could not outrun it. The force of the wave was unimaginable. It didn't just flood the street, it destroyed it. It hit the local firehouse, Engine 31, with such force that it knocked the entire building off its foundation. The firefighters inside were playing cards one minute, and the next they were buried under tons of debris and goo. It hit the elevated train tracks, the structural steel girders, and twisted them like pretzels. A train car was lifted off the tracks and left dangling over the abyss. This is the part that is hard to talk about, but we must honor the truth. Molasses is not water. Water splashes. Molasses crushes. It is 40% denser than water. When it hit people, it didn't just wash them away. It broke their bones, and if you were caught in it, you couldn't swim. The more you struggled, the deeper you sank. It was like quicksand, but sticky. 21 people lost their lives that day. Among them were two 10-year-old children, Pasquale and Maria, who had been collecting firewood near the tank. They never stood a chance. 150 others were injured. Horses, strong, powerful workhorses, were glued to the street, unable to move, and tragically had to be put down by the police because they couldn't be pulled free. The silence that followed the roar was eerie. The streets were covered in waist-deep brown muck. But then the heroes emerged. The rescue effort was a nightmare. Doctors and nurses rushed to the scene, but they had to wade through knee-deep syrup to get to the victims. Imagine the scene: the Red Cross nurses, their white uniforms stained brown, police officers slipping and falling as they tried to pull people from the wreckage. They had to set up a makeshift hospital in a nearby building, but the molasses was everywhere. It was in people's hair, in their lungs, in their eyes. The rescuers found that they couldn't just wash it off with water. They had to use salt water from the harbor to cut through the sugar. For weeks, the Boston harbor was stained brown. Now, here is where the story turns from a tragedy into a battle for justice. The company that owned the tank, United States Industrial Alcohol, immediately tried to blame someone else. They claimed that anarchists, terrorists, had planted a bomb. They said, "It wasn't our fault. It was sabotage." But the people of Boston didn't buy it. They launched a lawsuit. It became one of the longest and most famous trials in history. They brought in engineers and scientists, and they proved that the tank was built cheaply, with steel that was too thin to hold that much weight. They proved that the company ignored the leaks. After 6 years of fighting, the families won. It was a landmark victory for the little guy against a giant corporation. It changed the way engineers build structures in America forever. Every time you see a building inspector checking plans today, you can thank the victims of the Molasses flood. There is a local legend in the north end of Boston that I believe is true. Old-timers used to say that for decades after the flood, on hot summer days, you could still smell the faint scent of molasses rising from the cracks in the pavement, a sweet, ghostly reminder of the day the world turned upside down. It is a strange story, isn't it? A flood of sugar. It sounds impossible, but it reminds us of something important. We often look back at the past with rose-colored glasses. We think of the, quote, zero as simple and safe. But the people of 1919 faced challenges we can barely imagine. They faced a war, a flu pandemic, and yes, even a tidal wave of syrup. And yet, they rebuilt, they cleaned the streets, they scrubbed the bricks, and they carried on. You know, stories like this make me look at my own life a little differently. We spend so much time worrying about small things: a traffic jam, a cold cup of coffee, a rainy day. But life is fragile, my friends. It is precious. The people in the North End woke up that morning expecting a normal Wednesday. They didn't know that history was waiting for them around the corner. That is why we have to cherish the moments we have. So, do me a favor today. If you have loved ones nearby, give them a hug. If they are far away, give them a call. Don't wait for a special occasion. Just tell them you love them. And for you, my extended family here on YouTube, I want you to know how much I appreciate you pulling up a chair and listening to these stories. You keep this old man company, and for that I am grateful. There is no quiz today, no test. Just take a moment to be thankful for the solid ground beneath your feet and the fresh air in your lungs. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. I'll be right here, waiting for you in the next story. God bless you all. Bye now.